What is up, my aesthetic boys? It's Fresh back with another video. On today's episode, we take a look at r/MaliciousCompliance, my personal favorite storytime subreddit. I hope you enjoy. Boss tells him to put more fries down until he breaks, or as I like to call this story, the great disillusionment of Scott, the Burger King man. This happened to a friend of mine and someone who I've worked with for over 20 years. Let's call him Scott. This story always gets a laugh out of our group, especially since he does voices and acts out what happened. Unfortunately, I'm not as skilled as that, but I'll try my best. In the late 80s, Scott worked at a Burger King while still in high school. For the first few months, he always worked the late shift, and business was usually slow. The owners were a husband-wife team who, as you can imagine, came down hard all the time on the kids working. For the most part, Scott did not have to deal with them outside of them parking late at night with binoculars as they spied on the late crew to make sure they did their job. Then, summer hit. With summer vacations, Scott was moved to the lunch team. He was not used to how busy it was and was a bit overwhelmed. His main job was on the fryer. He took care of the fries, onion rings, and chicken sandwiches. The lunch crowd was really starting to build up that first day he was on the crew, and the wife owner walks by Scott, looks over his shoulder, and in a very harsh voice tells him to put down more fries, which of course Scott does. A few minutes later, she walks by again, even more agitated, and screams, "Put down more fries, we don't have enough." Scott puts down more. A third time she walks by and grabs him by the arm and pulls him around. She got right up in his face and said, "Are you some kind of an idiot? I just said more fries down now." So Scott did the only thing he knew how to do. He filled every fryer with as many fries as would fit and loaded every single row with as many fries as you could possibly put down. Soon the basket that held the finished fries was overflowing because he had so many. Well, the boss comes around, raises her hands in the air, and starts screaming, "You made too many fucking fries!" At which point, Scott had enough. He picked up a mustard and ketchup bottle and squeezed them both right into her face and clothes, yelled, "I quit," and stormed out of there. He said he was shaking so bad driving home and was worried the police would show up, but fortunately they never did. I'm not saying that all managers at fast and fast casual restaurants suck. I'm just saying that I've never heard a story about a good fast food manager. I mean, just the lack of awareness to reprimand an employee not once, not twice, but thrice to put down more fries and then have the audacity to tell them that they messed up. People like to ask what you would do if you could travel through time. Try to prevent a world war? Stop a terrorist attack? Accidentally almost make your mom fall in love with you, therefore nearly preventing yourself and your sibling from ever being born in the future? Well, if I ever got my hands on a time machine, you can bet your ass that my first stop would be a 1980s Burger King, just so I could see this man Scott double fisting some condiment bottles in a fit of absolute blinding fry-driven rage. Oh, to be a fly on the wall of that kitchen. Have the students build it. I am a technology education teacher who always went above and beyond for my school students and administrators. I spent countless hours designing and building things for the school, like signs, murals, wall art, games, etc. I really didn't mind because I enjoy the design challenges that go along with these builds. That was until I received the pink slip. For those of you who are not aware, a pink slip basically means that I may be losing my job the following school year. This really pissed me off because I had received great observations, became a role model for my students, and put in dozens of unpaid hours to create these side projects for the school. I had a meeting with my assistant superintendent who basically told me that she appreciated all of my hard work, but didn't see much value in my program, and with budget cuts coming down the pike, I would most likely be losing my job. Now, it needs to be mentioned that tech ed is not like the traditional shop class of the 70s where students would build birdhouses and ashtrays. My curriculum focused primarily on STEM with heavily involved hands-on applications. I related otherwise dry material to awesome projects that all students enjoyed. Kids actually liked their schoolwork, and she knew it. It's also worth noting that both the valedictorian and salutatorian were going to Ivy League colleges to pursue STEM degrees. Needless to say, I was beyond livid. The week following the meeting, my principal asked me if I was interested in building some new games for the cafeteria that students can play when they finished eating. Easy table games like mini knock hockey, checkerboards, etc., to alleviate students from getting out of control. I explained that I could not complete the project and that was that, until, well, the assistant superintendent caught me in the hallway and told me, "Just have the students build it." So that's exactly what I did. I tasked my laziest and most unqualified students for a special project, the result of which was glorious. Checkerboards that didn't have squares, knock hockey boards with splinters and uneven goals, laser engraved puzzles that didn't even fit together. I thanked the students and asked the assistant superintendent to come down to my lab because the student projects were done and they were excited to show them off. In she walks, and upon seeing the projects looks me dead in the eye. She now has a decision to make. 1, ask me what the hell happened, or 2, tell the students to their faces what a great job they did. She opted for choice number 2, going on and on about how great everything looks and how proud she was of the students, while I had the biggest smile on my face knowing just how crappy they turned out. I thanked her for suggesting to have the students build it, as she left with essentially a pile of scrap wood. The projects never quite made it to the cafeteria. I resigned from that school and took a job that paid $12,000 more at a place where I was valued. They ended up keeping the position and begged me to stay on board. I realized resigning was my best option because I could get an early jump on all the new openings as opposed to being let go at the end of the summer, which would leave me with the worst schools that couldn't find a teacher. Similar to this story, I went to a high school that offered a newer age style tech ed program. Now, my middle school called shop class tech ed, but I'm pretty sure I made a bird feeder and a footstool. The closest I came to modern technology there was a 30-year-old belt sander, but my high school did take it a bit more seriously. They had quote-unquote cutting-edge advancements like 3D printers, laser cutters, and a couple flight simulators, and the flight simulators is where the problem was. They offered an aerospace engineering class, and if you walked in that room and saw the level of projects that were made on, say, a 3D printer, if you saw a 17-year-old's inability to cut a 90-degree angle on a circular saw, you too would be damned concerned with their ability to fly even a virtual plane. There are many very capable teenagers in the world. Hell, there are even teenagers who can fly serious aircraft, yet somehow, pretty much none of them made their way into that classroom. It sucks to hear that the school in question was cutting funding for tech education because it does honestly have an impact on a lot of people. Hell, I never even took a class in that department, and the tech ed teacher at my high school had a huge impact on me. Administrators that couldn't care less about student welfare are all too common in public secondary education, and having had firsthand experience with similar admins, I definitely get a feeling of secondhand redemption hearing a story like this. The security regulations you wrote apply to you too. This was my first security gig right out of the military. Good starter job for security work. It was access control at a medium-sized aircraft engine factory. A friend of mine worked HR there, but also held the title as head of security, so he offered me a job and I accepted. One of the biggest rules were ID checks. Apparently, a few years prior, a couple of people had gotten in with photocopied IDs, so after that we had to physically check the ID to make sure it was plastic. We did this by touching it. Now, do access control enough and you start to memorize people. We didn't check those IDs by touching them because we knew them, and if they'd been fired, we would have gotten a notice. Well, that angered the head of HR, so she said some new rules. She wasn't the head of security, but security fell under HR, so she kinda was. All IDs must be checked, no exceptions. No non-employee is allowed through the gate without a notice signed by her or the head of security, and has to be submitted 12 hours prior to their entry, like for people scheduled for interviews. Visitor badges assigned without prior approval can only be done for normal drivers, like the post office or FedEx. Anyone who violates it will be reported by security to HR for a security violation. That was fine and dandy, we really didn't care. Everything went smooth for about a month until that one day. Here she comes to the gate, but she isn't driving, her husband is. It's raining, and I mean flood level raining. I asked her husband for his ID, and he says he didn't have one. She's seen where this was going, and she tried to stop me. He was only there to take her in because it was raining and she didn't want to walk from her car to the building and ruin her outfit. That's when I threw the rules back at her. I didn't have a security notice for him, so I couldn't assign a badge and couldn't let him in. She tried the whole "but it's only 100 yards" thing again, which I reminded her, these are the rules that you set down. She actually said, "Well, I'm your boss," even though technically she wasn't. "We are going in anyways," to which I replied again, her rule that any breaches of policy must be reported as a security violation, so there she is, dressed to the nines, forced to walk without a jacket to the building, 100 yards in the rain to get to her office. Why didn't we lend her a security rain jacket, you ask? Well, because there wasn't enough money in the security budget to buy them, according to her. Later that day, she modified the rules that on drop-offs that security has full discretion to allow someone entry for that purpose. We also got our rain jackets 2 weeks later, and she never bothered security again. Ah, corporate. I'd say I don't miss you, but I'm a college student, so I just haven't experienced that to any severe extent. I will commend OP on the outright level of his audacity, though, to insist that their supervisor follow the rules that she had set. As much as the boss is the receiver of the malicious compliance, and in these kinds of posts, basically the villain of the story, This seems to be a case where the boss genuinely thought she was doing something right, and once she found out she made a mistake, she fixed it. Was she micromanaging in the first place? Yeah, sure, but I give her respect for sucking it up, walking in the rain, and changing the policy. She didn't threaten to fire anyone, didn't overreact in some crazy way. She had put in a policy that was a bit too strict as an overreaction, to be fair, to a previous security breach, and once she was exposed to that fact, it was amended. I'm not saying this is necessarily an HR head that I'd love to have, but the ability to move forward in a situation like this is pretty commendable. We need to shorten our hedge to 3 feet max? Okay. My husband and I developed an unpleasant relationship with one of our neighbors, mostly because this lady liked to adopt kittens, whom of course we adore, and then basically throw them outside, where they invaded our backyard and preyed on cute native wildlife like tiny birds, chipmunks, bunnies, and so on. There's a bylaw against this in our HOA, and we made some use of it while she lived next door. After a couple of years, we found out that she was selling and moving away. Yay! However, she was still mad at us, and she shared her feelings with her real estate agent. The agent thought it over and called the very nice and polite bylaw officer to visit us because the hedge between our two properties was technically too high. It was maybe 6 feet high and needed to be half that. There's no real reason for this rule since we're on the outside of a bend on the road and visibility is fine, but whatever. My husband readily agreed to have at this lush, beautiful green hedge and got out there right away with his heaviest equipment. I quickly realized why he was so cheerful about doing this big job. As he cut the hedge to half its height, of course most of the greenery was trimmed away, and the result was a stark and temporarily sad-looking collection of bare branches and twigs. He carefully cleaned up after himself, and we kept an eye out for the agent. We were so lucky to be there when she next arrived and emerged from her car. Let's say that my husband's malicious compliance did not exactly improve the curb appeal of our next-door neighbor's property. She stood there for some time, then noticed us regarding her from our living room with gratified expressions and marched away. So incredibly satisfying. Now, to some viewers' mild displeasure, I've often voiced my dissent from over-the-top revenge stories, where people go out of their way to enact crazy revenge schemes, ruin people's lives, marriages, whatever. It's not that I don't think that you should get what you give necessarily, I've just never been a big fan of the aggressive, your head for my eye type mentality, as popular as it may be in some parts of the internet, which is partially why I love malicious compliance as a whole, and this story is about as quintessentially MC as it could get. Mrs. Unpleasant Neighbor Lady here tried to enforce unnecessary HOA rules, and the protagonist of our story politely complied in a manner that temporarily inconvenienced said lousy neighbor more than a 6-foot hedge would have if left untouched. Clean, professional, concise, a sense of retribution without letting our imaginations get carried away. I can root against both the neighbor and the ridiculous HOA rules without justifying illegal activity while still getting a sense of finality to it, a sense of karmic retribution. I mean, what isn't there to love?